Welcome back to this conversation that is co-sponsored by Menno Media and Mennonite Church USA and Mennonite Church Canada. We're glad to have you this evening for panel 2 for a new set of voices that will talk a little more specifically about Voices Together. And a reminder that this is being recorded and will be available on the Voices Together website and the Menno Media YouTube sometime next week. And I will turn it over to Anna Lee to introduce our new panelists.
Wonderful, thank you. We are so delighted that you're with us, panelists. We had a really rich conversation in part 1 and are really looking forward to continuing it, especially diving into Voices Together now in part 2. So Matthew Boutda is a conductor, organist, and singer from Toronto, Canada. He holds a Bachelor of Music and a Master of Sacred Music degree from the University of Toronto. Matthew is delighted to be part of the Rich Music program as Director of Music at Leaside United Church in Toronto. Growing up, Matthew attended Allow Canadian Mennonite Church in Toronto. Shannon Dycus is the Dean of Students at Eastern Mennonite University. As a consultant with the Voices Together project, she contributed to leader resources and songs celebrating Black traditions. Rashard Allen is currently the Director of Music and Worship at Nessville Mennonite Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He holds a Master's in Sacred Music from Perkins School of Theology and a Doctor of Worship Studies from the Robert E. Weber Institute for Worship Studies. He's very experienced in introducing multi-ethnic worship songs and practices to predominantly white Mennonite congregations. SaeJin Lee served as a member of the Mennonite Worship and Song Committee that compiled Voices Together. She enjoyed working on the intercultural worship, visual arts, and worship resources subcommittees. She now works as a children's advocate for a domestic violence and sexual assault service organization in the greater Chicago area. Finally, Keshia Littlebear Cetrone is a Northern Cheyenne from Bisbee, Montana, and belongs to the White River Cheyenne Mennonite Church. She has served on the Mennonite Central Committee Central States Board and was part of the Voices Together consultant group on materials related to Indigenous communities. So welcome to you all. We're so glad that you're with us.
SaeJin, if you don't mind starting off. We've heard you raise caution to our church's tendency to treat anti-racism as a checklist and a project to be accomplished rather than a lifelong commitment or a posture of living. Some of our congregations appreciate the idea of one Sunday a year or a worship series or an element of worship that focuses on anti-racism, and the more perfectly performed, the better. But why is it important to engage in this work of anti-racism as an ongoing basis? And what cautions or encouragements would you provide? And from the Voices Together process, were there particular songs and worship resources that you thought were really important to include to help communities worship in this way?
Yeah, thank you, Katie, for that question. And I feel like there's already have been themes of important themes that I want to share already mentioned from the first panel. And so I'm really grateful that there's coherence between our conversations. But just wanted to begin by saying that anti-racism is not a fad or something to be accomplished immediately, but rather a way of living. And I think this is one of the themes that has already been kind of mentioned in the first panel. If I sing these songs or pray these prayers, I am anti-racist. Or if I sing these songs well or perfectly, I am anti-racist. I think those are pretty dangerous ways of thinking about this whole idea or this whole way of being. And Andrea and Tony mentioned earlier about controlled worship, and singing each other's song is not about perfection, but rather about relationships. And in the North American Mennonite culture and primarily white Mennonite spaces that I have grown up in, I've observed a high regard for perfection, and maybe sometimes even like an idol of perfection. And there's two responses in regard to this way of valuing perfection. And one is that we are hindered by our striving for perfection that it paralyzes us from even trying anything. So we're so afraid that we're going to make a mistake that we don't even engage anything and just stay comfortably to what is already ours. Or there's a sense of pride that creeps in when we sing this song so good or we eat this food so well, then we have this like, oh, I am cultured kind of attitude. And this attitude is one of mastering or perfecting. And it's not really about relationships, but rather about performance and maybe, dare I say, even about conquering. It's a way of trying to be better at, or to just say, this is something that I can master. And I think that's a very dangerous way of approaching, and even in worship settings. So remembering that these songs come from communities and people who love them and are fed by them, and remembering that we are one body, whether we have people of various culture and racial ethnic backgrounds present in our local congregations or not. The reality of the Mennonite Church USA is that it is diverse, it is colorful, and it is a fellowship of children of God created in God's image. And so to learn each other's heart songs is to be in relationship with our siblings and family in Christ, and to rejoice and weep with each other, to have our hearts and bodies ache and break for what breaks each other's. So again, from the earlier panel, I forget who mentioned, but we were talking about building a new canon by engaging each other's songs. So to remember that our community of MCUSA is diverse. So can we build a canon within our churches of these new songs that we can sing from each other's cultures and each other's heart songs? So in this light, a song that comes to my mind from my own context of Korea that I was very excited to have it be included in Voices Together is number 391, 오소서, which touches on the commitment of peace, and which I think the commitment to peace is a fairly Anabaptist or Mennonite theme. And in the specific context of the Korean Peninsula that has been divided into two over 70 years, this is a song that unites for me the prayer of Anabaptists longing for peace, but also asking for the Prince of Peace to make all of us one body and be reconciled in God's people. So that's one song that comes to mind. And one specific worship resource that comes to mind in trying to celebrate our various ways is number 850, Peace Be With You. And as you can see, I'll just quickly hold it up. I'm sure all of you have seen it already, but even it's just already a visual representation of the diversity represented in our churches. Again, it's a practice that is widely used among various cultures and traditions of blessing each other, using the same blessing that Jesus used to his disciples when he reappeared to them after the resurrection. It's for us to claim that message of peace and to bless each other in that. So I feel like that's another tangible resource that we can use in celebrating each other.
Thank you, that is wonderful, SaeJin. Matthew and Rashard are both professional song worship leaders, and so they have a lot of experience choosing songs and teaching new songs. And so I'd like to ask both of you, what are some best practices for worshiping with songs from many communities? And what are some specific examples of songs that you have led from other cultures and Voices Together? And how do you teach it? How do you approach it? Matthew, would you like to start?
Yeah, I guess the first step I kind of take personally is like this kind of self-interrogation, whether that's worship planning, picking the music or song leading. I tend to ask myself, some questions, can the ways we share non-Western songs unintentionally perpetrate racism? How can congregations just be more aware or respectful when engaging non-Western songs? What's our purpose? What's the congregation's purpose for using them within worship? And, just these kind of questions that I often address and try to think about as I'm planning. I guess just before jumping into thinking of some practices, it's also helpful to note of, like, there isn't really a best practice, I'd say, like there is not one way to kind of lead, songs. It's just, I like to think in terms of, are we being respectful, honoring, or not? And, how are we, can we actually be disrespectful in how we lead songs? You know, certain things such as choosing these songs just as, you know, spice or flavor, you know, for variety is one thing, you know, kind of thinking about that, or, you know, just how else, like romantically arguing that it's enough to sing these songs because we're praying with them. You know, it's just some things to think about. But there are ways that we can engage in a more respectful manner. I think about the context we're in, the room, who's in the room, our spaces. Congregational leaders can move us, you know, from this singular kind of state of isolated personhood to a more collective state of belonging, and just to really engage the agencies of people, you know, as people are enabled to sing with each other. And so one thing I like to think about is sharing the context, you know, sharing the piece of music, you know, what's the story behind it before we actually engage in singing as a community. And it's important that we know, you know, and honor these people. Especially, it's an educational piece as well for all of us. And so doing lots of research is what I do before, you know, and engaging in communication and relationship and continuing that is important as well. And if there's also a way to share leadership, you know, ways to engage community, maybe you might have someone in your community that, you know, would be better suited or would know, you know, and how can you really uplift other voices as well, as a way to engage some of that. But some of you may say, okay, what if we don't, you know, have someone per se, and that could lead us in the song, but, you know, we really want to lead it. I think just the most important thing of just, you know, honoring by sharing that background is the most important thing. Always, you know, give context to your songs. So I'm sure Rashad, he's got something to share as well.
Although I would say about 3/4 of what I was going to share you just said, so I'll be a little bit more brief. But yeah, I think for me, it is putting the same. It's one of the things I think that helps us to decenter whiteness in the way that we choose and lead songs is that we don't look at certain songs or certain types of songs to be superior to one another. So it's like, I'm going to use the same care and level of preparation to teach a song of another culture as I would for a Bach chorale. Or, you know, or it's something, you know, I want to give it the highest level of care that I can, like you were saying, Matthew. The other thing I would say is that I want to be careful, but I also want to be fearless. I don't want to be so afraid of not getting it perfect. I want to aim for authenticity, but not be so bound by it that that I feel paralyzed from being able to do, or the congregation feels paralyzed from being able to do certain songs because they can't get it perfectly, because they can't pronounce it just right, or, you know, they don't sing the syncopation quite perfectly. And allow for grace for, you know, with that. You know, so that's one of the things I look at. Also, just, I mean, in the digital age that we live in, we have so many resources that we can use to help people to help our congregation to be able to have a sense of how these songs go, and have a sense of to be able to even fall in love with, you know, songs of other cultures ahead of time, using YouTube links or that you can put in the bulletin or church-wide communications so that they can hear these songs ahead of time. You know, teaching it to my choir, even if they're not going to be singing, even if the choir isn't singing that Sunday or isn't singing that particular piece that Sunday, but then I have a group of people who already know it and can help, you know, initially. One of the things we're actually doing throughout the summer, the first thing I was at this evening, when this started, I was actually we're doing a weekly sing through of some of the new material in Voices Together. And that gives me an opportunity with a smaller group of people to be able to introduce these songs, to give context and talk about their meanings, the theology and things. outside of the worship service, so that at least there's a core group of people that get it, and hopefully that then can kind of spread that sort of that sort of appreciation can spread throughout the congregation. And so those are just some specific things that I'm doing right now.
Rashard, can you name a specific song that, or like what did you go through this evening, or is there a specific song that you have a story or like a process that you went through for researching or anything?
Okay, so to give one example, there's a song unfortunately we have over 200 copies of Voices Together, and none of them are currently in my office. But but there is a particular song, I forget the number of it. It's in Voices Together. I believe it's in Shona. It's in Zulu. Basically it expresses that there's no one like Jesus. You know what song I'm talking about?
Hakuna Wakaita.
Say it again.
Hakuna Wakaita. Yeah,
Hakuna Wakaita. So I know that song in Swahili. So I was able to kind of share. So as I was preparing, first of all, knowing it in one language but not in another, I had to go back and learn the Shona a little bit more, a little bit better, so I could, to make sure I have my pronunciation straight, looking up the pronunciations, not just assuming that it's going to be phonetic. But then also being able to share how I learned of the song, and some of the information that I learned of the song in the Kenyan Swahili context. Since it is really the exact same melody, the exact same the exact same words. It's just just a different language. Because I didn't realize that the song had been translated in so many languages throughout Africa. But sort of reminding myself a little bit of how, when I first learned it, which was through Urbana, one of the Urbana worship CDs. I forget from what year, but so being able to share that, being able to share some of the movements that I learned from a couple of Kenyan song leaders that I know, and being able to share those movements as well with the congregation and encouraging them in that, and just kind of brushing myself up on all those things, so that when I presented it, I can present it with the same competence that I could, a song within the African American tradition that I might be more familiar with, or a contemporary, Christian song that I've known for a long time. I was able to, and what we did is that we went back and forth. I taught them I decided for that session, I would teach them, okay, we're going to learn the first half of the song in Shona. And then the second half of the song, we're just going to sing in English. That way it's kind of that way it's sort of, dipping your toes in the water a little bit, not overwhelming them so much that they can't really engage. Because I want a congregation to be able to engage as soon as possible. And if they're constantly stumbling over difficult language, they can't engage very quickly. So I tend to limit a little bit. I'll tend to limit a little bit how much we sing in the language, essentially, and then maybe initially, and then maybe the next time we do it, we'll add the second half of the we'll add the second half of the of the original language.
Great practical suggestions. Matthew, do you have any specific examples of songs and how you teach them? How do you, are there other ways to break them down to get pieces and be able to engage right away? Or if you, other ideas about how to introduce them?
One of them, yeah, I was just thinking of, just as Rashard was talking, one of them is in number 2, the Come All You People, Uyai Mose. And it's actually also number 2 in this other hymnal I'm using called More Voices as well. So it's kind of ironic. They're both number 2s, but there's different weeks where we engage in these songs. So it's not just used once, and it's one of those where we would continue to teach our congregations and starting out in English, something that my congregation is very familiar with, and then adding in the Shona language has been helpful later on as they get more comfortable. And the way I also learned it was that we were worshiping at the time with another kind of Zimbabwe Methodist congregation, and once a month we would do communion together, a joint kind of communion service, and they would actually do this kind of co-leadership in leading our congregation through this song. And you'd be surprised about how many times it could be sung as well, and just when you're just moved by the Spirit from it all, and how it's not always so tied to a hymnal itself, and engaging outside from the hymnal itself and orally in other ways, and yeah, so it was that's kind of what I would just say. And with our congregation, it was always easier to start out in a familiar language and getting them comfortable. And then as weeks progressed, we would add on the Shona language for this, and as well as other instrumentation that we encourage our congregation to use as well. So.
Good, thanks. Keshia, there are 3 songs in Voices Together that use the Cheyenne language. Number 59, Ehane Heama, and number 8, Jesus a Naheto Teta Nome, are from the Cheyenne Spiritual Songbook. And number 181, Creation is a Song, is simultaneously English and Cheyenne. Can you speak about those songs? And I know your congregation uses the Cheyenne Songbook every week in your church, so can you talk about what that means to you? And then also, how do you want white Mennonites and non-Cheyenne speakers to approach and sing these songs?
Well, I think I first have to start out in acknowledging that I am not a Cheyenne speaker. Through colonization and all of these things, we have lost a lot of our language. And that leads me right into how I feel about these songs being in Voices Together and in other hymns, other hymnals. And that is to say, this is one way that we are able to preserve our language. Because although I can't speak Cheyenne, I can sing in Cheyenne, and I feel the connection. And those are my heart songs, even if I can't use that language conversationally. The 2 songs that are in our Cheyenne hymnal, which is, and this came out of a big project, and in the last panel there was someone who said, and I can't remember who it was, but said, when a culture takes what they have learned and starts worshiping in their own language with their own music, that's when you know that they have really accepted what is being offered to them. And Cheyenne people started receiving songs. Cheyenne people don't believe in we wrote the song. We are given the songs from Creator. Creator gives us this song, and then we share it with whoever. And there are songs for every occasion, for everything that we're looking at, for hard times that we're going through and struggle that we're going through. And those songs were being lost because it was an oral tradition. So the elders who held those songs were dying, and we had no way of holding on to those songs. And part of that is because they were not used in worship service, even in our church. The songs that were used in worship service in our church were translated hymns, hymns that were originally in English or German and translated then. So it is, you know, those melodies, Amazing Grace, The Sweet By and By, but with Cheyenne words. And these indigenous melodies and indigenous words were not allowed to be used in worship until, I think, you know, how recently it was, well, I don't know, recently, 70 years, 100 years, in the last 100 or so years that was actually allowed. And then in the 1980s is when this worship service, when this hymnal came out, or they started working on it. This includes 60 or so translated hymns, and the rest are indigenous words with indigenous melodies. And when thinking about that, I think about our connection to the broader Mennonite church. Seeing these songs in Voices Together connects me to the broader Mennonite church. It's not just us on our reservation, and it's not just us, you know, way out here in the middle of eastern Montana, in the middle of nowhere. We're connected. And that's what I feel when I see these hymns in here. I feel honored that they're included. When white Mennonites approach these songs, I feel like traditionally we have withheld trust. We're very distrustful of our white brothers and sisters when carrying these songs. And knowing that I can trust who these songs are, other people to sing these songs, because other people have given me that same level of trust to sing their songs from their culture. And, you know, this goes back to the conversation within the first panel about appropriation. And that, you know, I'm offering you a gift. I'm sharing these songs with you as a gift. And that makes us bonded in relationship. And in that relationship, I trust you to honor the songs that we're sharing and honor them. You're not going to get it perfect. It's not going to sound just right. I'm, you know, even the pronunciation of the song, Jesus, you know, thinking about that pronunciation. Katie didn't get it perfect, but guess what? She did a good job. And that's, you know, that's one step there. I trust you to hold that song with respect and with honor, to say, I'm going to carry this. And that makes us, you know, brothers and sisters. We're connected in that way. And so when white Mennonites approach this, I want them to approach it with respect and with the level of understanding, not only of Cheyenne people, because we've been here, but of, you know, we talk about Canadian land acknowledgement. So a land acknowledgement, whose land are you on? Who are the indigenous people nearest to you? And how do we call together to worship? And as long as that is the catalyst of the thought process, the imperfections, those don't matter. They're out there. What matters is I'm treating this song with the same reverence that I treat songs that I'm super familiar with. And just holding that up and treating that gift with respect and singing it, because we're You know, we are still here. Indigenous people are still here, in the Mennonite church, in our country. We may be few in number, and there may be things like in Canada, you know, finding bodies in unmarked graves of children who never made it home. Those are the things that I want these songs to invoke. The thoughts that I want these songs to bring is not just the words or the English translation of these and where they fit within worship and within our worship in predominantly white congregations, but how do we think about these broader things? How do we honor the, I don't know what the number is as of today, but 1,000 children that have been found at residential schools in Canada, and who the United States hasn't even begun to look. And a lot of our songs in the Cheyenne hymnal come from Cheyennes that were taken from our home and taken to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and dropped off there and had their hair cut off, and they couldn't speak Cheyenne anymore. They could only speak English. And thinking about the fact that I am 33 years old, this is 2021, and those were my great grandparents. It's not that far removed. So those are the things that I want white Mennonites to start to think about, and worship leaders to think about when presenting these, because it's not that far removed. And these songs talk about a struggle that is so real. And so taking a little bit of time to understand where and understanding when we say, God have mercy on us. In some of the songs, and I can't remember which one it is in here, but God, take me through where it is difficult. It's gonna be difficult, and it's gonna be uncomfortable, and it's gonna be vulnerable, but how else do we learn? How else do we grow? How else do we build relationships? But to be uncomfortable and vulnerable and in a painful place and thinking about painful things.
Thank you so much, Keshia. I feel, and I know I've heard this from other song leaders too, feeling, I mean, especially white song leaders, feeling this a tension between respect, we have to get it right, and what SaeJin was saying, that we can't let that either paralyze us from not doing it or feeling like making that become a conquering impulse that in order to get this right, I have to conquer it. But you, Keshia, you open up so much more about the emotional engagement with the song, and I really appreciate that. Thank you. Shannon, let's move to worship resources, which has a different kind of engagement. Voices Together has many written selections for spoken resources for worship, calls to worship, readings of scriptures, and benedictions. How can these resources help further the work of anti-racism, and are there specific examples that can be particularly effective? And at the same time, there are many congregations across many cultures, including white congregations, that don't use this type of scripted resources. Are there ways that you would encourage worship leaders to go beyond those scripted resources in order to decenter whiteness? And are there ways Voices Together can help us do this? So how can the scripted resources help us, and how should we go beyond those resources?
Yeah, thank you, Katie. And I want to say thank you, Keshia. That was a meaningful story that you shared, and I'm grateful. I appreciate that. Thank you. And I think it captures exactly what I would acknowledge about our worship resources. Katie, you mentioned that they are a little bit different from our songs, but when we really lean into it, our prayers our songs are prayers, and our prayers are songs. It's the tempo and tone with which we offer them. And so in the exact same ways that, that we are talking about song, many of our worship resources live into the same expectations. One of the examples I want to offer is 1038. It's a prayer that's offered in both Spanish and English languages, but it's a prayer from Oscar Romero, and offered in 1977, a couple of years before he was assassinated. And the prayer starts off by saying, La paz no es producto de terror ni del miedo. Peace is not the product of terror or fear. When we hear these words, just like in all the ways that we've been talking about tonight, just like this is a gift, this is a story. This is a part of Bishop Romero's story for his prayer to still say to us that peace is not a product of terror or fear. And so when we come to these worship resources, it is us paying attention to the context, the story that we are invited into when we listen in to the voices that have offered them to us. What's really important in our worship resources section is that each of these resources give us the name and the date and the location for us to contextualize and for us to listen in. And that's our work when we come to these resources. When we open up the book, it's our work to contextualize these voices. And then our work becomes the way that we enter in, understanding that we are joining a chorus of voices that have already been telling this story. Romero offered these words first, and then all of our El Salvadorian siblings are saying these words and have been saying these words for decades. And so we don't come and jump into the middle of this story. These are not our words. This is not our song. We join a chorus of people. And when we understand ourselves a part of a story, a part of a narrative, and not in the center of it, that also helps us to frame how we approach it and how we hold it, allowing us to decenter our identities and to really allow us to hear the beautiful message of peace that's offered here from Romero. In the same way, I would point to the resource 1024 that is from Rosemary Freeney Harding. These are some of my favorite words. She says, there is no scarcity, there is no shortage, no lack of love, of compassion, of joy in the world. There is enough. There is more than enough. Rosemary Harding was an activist in the civil rights movement, the spouse of Vincent Harding, and gives us these words in the midst of struggle and survival. And for her to declare that there is enough, that there is more love, that there is more joy, like is overcoming. And so for us to say these words with her, to declare with her that there is more than enough, that there is more than what we can see, more than what is right in front of us, we participate in the chorus of this. And so that's the way that we can begin to participate in the work of anti-racism. One of the other things that our resources offer us that's unique to, I think, our time now, Voices Together gives us opportunities to pay attention to national events as they emerge as crises. Numbers 1043, 1044 give us responses to national occasions or community crises. Particularly 1044 gives us this kind of layers of understanding of invitation into how we are responding to a community crisis. So it first talks about in our doubt and our fear. And then it talks about in our anger or frustration, or then in our pain or despair. And so we get to moments where where something tragic has happened in our country, and we want to come together as a community and we want to pray. And so this becomes a resource for us to say the words that we can't always find in that moment. And what's unique about this opportunity, and this goes to the second part of your question, Katie, that we can use these resources, not always saying these words together, but we can sit in our communities and we can say, say the words that feel most true for you right now. And that gives us an opportunity to hear the people who speak up when the word fear comes, and the people who are loudest when the word anger comes. And we get to hear and understand and notice what people are holding as we move through moments of crises, and paying attention to each other's realities, to each other's needs, particularly because as we have communities that include multiple ethnicities, I may be sitting next to you, Katie, in a sanctuary, and something's gonna land on me differently than it lands on you. And for me to be able to name my anger while you can name your fear at the same time, and for us to hear that in one another, is critical to us being community, and critical to us actually naming the impacts of crises in our country. And so these resources come to us as opportunities for praying together, but also to do some of the work of listening and processing what's happening around us. And then, like, words are never enough. Words are never enough, and then words are sometimes too much. When we think about the resources that are offered to us in gifts like Voices Together, like, these are starting points that invite us to tell our own stories. And so the work then is to use these as opportunities to ask new questions of one another, and to then not lean into the scripted words here as is sometimes most comfortable for us, but then to use this as an opportunity to say, all right, in this response to community crisis, there's naming of doubt and fear. Let's close our hymnals, and what are the prayers on our own hearts, to use this as an invitation to tell our own stories, and to be inviting one another into how we would offer our own responses to crises and our own responses to community. So it's invitation to then begin to tell our own stories as we participate in the work of storytelling that comes to us in the long journey of scriptures and songs and hymns, and then our lived realities right now.
Yeah, a follow-up question. I hear you saying people can speak into these words in different ways, and I know quite a few white Mennonites who read along as rote, and they all kind of match their pitch and their speed, and everything sounds the same. So is there a way that you can right now give encouragement to worship leaders, that in a way to coach congregants to speak their voice, and a way that you could encourage congregants to lean into that kind of speaking?
Sure. Very practically, with a resource like 1044 that responds to a community crisis, there's space for everyone to have their hymnal and to read through the words silently. So an invitation from the worship leader to say, turn to 1044, read through these words silently while we sit in the silence of how we are holding this. And then the opportunity then becomes for the worship leader to say, I will be the voice that carries us all the way through. And as you recognize the places where your spirit shows up the most, speak those words. And we'll listen to each other as it echoes louder. And maybe as we get to doubt and fear, there's 3 voices. And maybe as we get to pain and despair, there's 30 voices. And we get to hear that. We get to experience that. But there's the foundation of the worship leader's voice. And then we invite the congregation to speak into the parts of it that resonate in their own spirits. And then that becomes a way to hear and to listen to one another.
That's wonderful. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to Keshia. She had a pure fire answer about the two songs from the Cheyenne songbook, and I want to get back to the third Cheyenne song, which was written by Doug and Jude Crable, white Mennonites from Kansas, I believe. And if can you talk about how that is appropriate for that kind of writing songs to happen?
It is long thought that it is disrespectful for to sing this song or to honor this song as a Cheyenne song because it was written by white folks, but it wasn't. The way that Cheyennes have come to view this is through relationships. So Doug and Jude received this song from Creator, the way Cheyennes receive songs. After building a relationship with Cheyennes, both in Oklahoma and in Montana, where I'm from, including with myself, Doug and Jude are very dear friends of mine. And I visit them whenever I have a chance to get back to Newton, Kansas. And so that to me, that basis of relationship, because Cheyennes are extremely relational. So when we talked about appropriation and in the last panel and how Melissa, I think is her name, offered that as a gift, and we accept that gift, and then we have to be good stewards of that gift. This is the same kind of thing. The relationship opened up their ability to receive this song from Creator and put it to a tune that was received by an elder from our community that has long passed named Maud Fighting Bear. So the tune comes from that, and then help with translation. They didn't just try to figure it out on their own using Google. They went to the sources for the translation. And so with that relationship and that back and forth, that makes that a very respectful song. And I absolutely enjoy this song. I will say that I think I've only sung it in Cheyenne once. Other than that, I sing it in English, because that is where I intersect. I am half white, half German Mennonite, half Northern Cheyenne, and this song allows me to enter into a space where both of those are okay, the tension of opposites, to hold that. And so I generally don't sing it in Cheyenne, but it has that indigenous melody.
Thank you. Another topic, contemporary worship music. We intentionally included, I'm going to start with you, Rashard, on this question. We intentionally included contemporary worship music in multiple languages and voices together to reflect the fact that it is heart music across many cultures, in English and in many other languages, in Mennonite congregations and across Christian denominations. It is also true that the globalization of contemporary worship music and all of hymnody is due to colonialism and imposition of Western culture through evangelism, and we've heard about this evening as well. So how can communities engage and individuals engage this complexity in receiving contemporary worship music? I've heard some people say we don't sing contemporary worship music because it is so emblematic of colonialism and the squashing of other non-Western cultures. But yet, as I said, it's heart songs. It is heart music for many in many languages. So it's very complicated and a lot of conflicts there. How can we think about this? And you need to unmute, Rashard.
Sorry about that. So the very short answer is I'm not sure, but I do have some thoughts. And I think I think how you engage it and how you engage complexity also has to do with the church context that you're in. For example, if you're in a multi-ethnic context, you're going to engage it in a different way, particularly because in multi-ethnic context, it's very easy to regress to the mean, where it's like you only end up doing songs that most resonate across the cultural lines. And those songs, and because those songs are usually from a white Western context, what communicates is that white worship is normative, and that's something that is frankly problematic in particularly if you are in a multi-ethnic context, and you see far too much of that, whether it be in the Mennonite Church or just throughout the North American church in general. But what I would say is that if you are, I think it's important to know why certain songs resonate within certain communities and across communities, particularly when that song is not indigenous to that community. I think it's important to know why. Is it because of how it sings, or is it because of the theology of the meaning, the meaning behind those particular words? Why do those words, why does that melody, why does that really resonate, and why does it become a heart song within that community? And how then do we honor those aspects of other communities when we do songs that sort of translate across across cultural lines? Yeah, for example, I think of the song. I think of the fact that in Voices Together, the song "Breathe," along with a number of other songs, "How Great Is Our God" and others, are in multiple languages in the hymnal. And I was just talking about this with someone yesterday, actually, that when I know that "This Is the Air I Breathe" is a song that is considered a heart song, certainly in many Latinx communities, as well as the white European, contemporary Christian music world. So if my congregation sings that, if I have my congregation engaged in that song in part by singing in Spanish, one of the things that we're doing is that we are if we do it well, we're acknowledging the fact that that we have some people in our congregation, or even if they're not in our congregation, there are people within the Mennonite Church who are worshiping in their second or third or even fourth language. And I think it's an opportunity for us, if we sing that song, if we sing some of these songs or portions of these songs in our own second or third or not native language, and it gives us an opportunity to empathize with them to a degree, and I think, and also be and also just to be just to be aware that the singing in English is not better worship than singing in any other language. That singing it in Spanish, singing it in Cheyenne, singing it in Shona, singing it in heck Latin, German, whatever, is equally good. It's equally good worship that God receives. So I think it helps us to break down sort of, sort of white North American, that white North American worship is normative, is the standard. So yeah, as for congregations that choose not to do those songs for that reason, I get it. I know our congregation, there are a lot of heart songs in the contemporary worship music realm that are, that have made it into Voices Together, and some that and some that didn't, and we still do some of those songs. But yeah, any opportunity that I have as a worship leader and as a song leader to be able to make those connections across cultures, especially amongst especially amongst the Haitian, Puerto Rican, I'm just naming cultures that are in our congregation, Kenyan people, I want to be able to make those connections and to let them know that, and to remind them that their culture is honored, and that their language, their native tongue, is every bit as valuable as the English that they normally have to, that they normally end up having to sing in. I don't know if that all made sense, but.
Yeah, thank you. SaeJin, do you have ideas to add about contemporary worship music?
Yeah, similar to what Rashard said, I think it's a complicated one because it's so prevalent. But I think the question that I ask is, or the reality I think about is that we are in relationship with the songs themselves too. So the songs don't exist on their own, but as we sing them, we also ask, are these songs speaking truth to us? Are they edifying us in churches? And maybe it did historically, and maybe it doesn't anymore. So I think those are the kind of questions that we continue to ask, and to complexify the topic even further. Another reality is that Christian or contemporary worship music and hymnody isn't just a Western product either. So like in Korea, there are contemporary Western music, or not contemporary Western, contemporary worship music that's being written by Korean songwriters. I'm sure in Spanish they're being written, and just to say, I think for us to also think about contemporary worship music and then equal, Hillsong and whatever those, however many of those quote unquote white contexts, I think that can also be dangerous to just generalize it in that way, because there are gifts that can be shared around the global world from that contemporary worship music styles. So that's another thing to add to the basket of complexity. And I guess I ultimately get back to asking the question of what are these songs saying, and are they reflective of our beliefs and practices and values? And hopefully, I think one of the tensions that I sometimes feel with contemporary worship music is that it doesn't always reflect my commitment to peace, or my, I want it to more robustly reflect the discipleship or following of Jesus more robustly, and it doesn't do that. So maybe we ourselves can be, in our own context, be producers of these songs, and thinking about not just importing all these songs, but how can we, in our own context, create songs of our own? So those are some of the questions that I think about. I don't think I have a solution to how to approach the complex dynamic of contemporary worship music, but those are some of my thoughts.
Go ahead, Rashard.
And there's some excellent scholarship that was done on this by Lim Sui Hong and Lester Ruth. Loving on Jesus, the concise history of contemporary worship. So I would definitely recommend, that as a resource, because it also helps to, I felt that resource really helps to understand some of those complexities that we're speaking on. It also helps us to understand the history and the movements out of which contemporary worship music came.
Thank you. Yes, exactly. Another resource to highlight as we think about contemporary worship music is a video that was compiled of a group of Voices Together members who went and visited a number of churches that worship, Mennonite churches that worship in languages other than English. And one of the things that's so interesting about that video is that many of those congregations are worshiping with contemporary worship music. And I think it points to one of the common themes here is to do your homework, and that we maybe we have assumptions about what a church, church that worships in Korean would sing, and maybe that our assumption isn't right. And when we actually go visit, we see that they're worshiping with a different style of music than we may have assumed. Or any other number of examples. And so that's a really interesting video to watch, just to get a sense of the breadth of musical idioms, and especially contemporary worship music in communities that worship. That video highlights in languages other than English, but certainly in English as well. Kind of talking about languages a little bit. Before I go to that, actually, I'll just say, just a reminder that the Q&A is open if you want to add any of your own questions in there, things that are still unanswered for you as you process all of this. As we think about languages, one of the tensions I think we sometimes feel, and this is something Keshia kind of talked about, is Keshia, you highlighted creation as a song and singing it in English. And so for song leaders, what's the balance of pushing yourself to try a new language and allowing the congregation to maybe be more comfortable singing it in English? I wonder, Matthew, if you want to take that one on the balance between learning a song first in English or in its original language.
Yeah, I guess an example, if I think of my own context as a Lao Canadian, in Voices Together, there is one Lao song. This is 525. Dear Friends Were One, O Pinong Oi. Often, so I'm pretty familiar with like Lao ethnic Mennonite churches in Ontario, and they often also generally have worship services with other Mennonite churches as well, joint services, predominantly with also like white and Anglo context there. And so when they do joint services, this is a good example that could be used where Laotians, and this is probably the first instance I've seen like in a hymnal actually that has the Lao script per se. So that's kind of a learning thing for everyone to actually see that. And so one way is by singing at the same time, even the language you're comfortable with to start out. And so that may be in Lao, that may be in English, and to see how that works together as well with this single melody. This melody in the song is very familiar for Laotians. It's quite a popular folk melody as well. It's often referred to as like it's called Duang Champa, which is kind of like this plumeria flower. It's pretty popular as well. And just so this text though is kind of new, and it's still it's anonymous as well. You can find the song as well as in Sound the Bamboo, but if you're also looking for ways to engage in accompanying it, I think there may be an accompaniment that I may have also shared as well that people can use, and using a soloistic instrumental piece to play the melody along with the congregation might support that. But I just think you can experiment with this as an example, right? So kind of singing in the language you're comfortable with. Yeah.
That's great. We had a question in the chat or in the Q&A about singing in multiple languages at once. And so it sounds like you've touched on that can be a helpful way to begin the process of learning a song, doing what language feels most comfortable to you. And that's something SaeJin at the beginning highlighted, the Peace Be With You resource. And that's another really amazing way to use that resource, is to have people say peace be with you and greet each other in that way with whatever language feels comfortable to them. Excellent. want to dive in a little bit to highlight, if we can, just a few more Voices Together resources. Panelists, how do you engage or hope people engage the songs and Voices Together from your culture or from many different cultures? And I'm wondering if we can highlight some specific examples. So some of you have highlighted specific examples. I wonder if I can put Shannon on the spot. You're welcome. I know you were hoping I would do that.
No problem, no problem. I'm not gonna be, so I'm gonna talk and I'm gonna look at the same time. One of the things that we worked on as we were compiling some of the songs from the African American or Black tradition was in looking at the hymnal of worship book, and this is a pattern in several denominations. The songs that are associated with Black or African American traditions are always related to themes of overcoming and having to strive toward this good thing from this dark place. And so as we were looking at the resources that might be included, the question became, what does it mean to connect the voice and the song of Black Christians with joy, just pure joy? And how do we reorient ourselves to how we relate to people of color when we understand that everything is not about struggle? Like, there is a significant reality of struggle and overcoming, and there is joy, there is beauty, there is creativity. And when we sing those songs and include those themes in the songs that we sing, it also changes our relationships to people as we begin to understand just the pureness of joy in other people and not having to always see the struggle in other people. And so as we look at some of the songs that are included, I think that it is also evident that there is a broadening of themes as we look at that tradition and that resource.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Rashard, another resource to highlight?
So this past Sunday, actually, we introduced How Can I Say, which is that 388? I'm doing that from memory. To our congregation. I had done it I had actually done it in previous churches since I first learned it through Jimmy Abington, through Dr. Jimmy Abington, but back in like 2001 when it was written. But yeah, we actually used it in the context of, this was the very first time since pre-COVID that we were going to do any sort of greeting one another in the worship service. And not only was the song extremely well received, I also inadvertently caused a little bit of consternation because people took that people took that permission to greet one another and really went with it a little bit further than perhaps I expected, with hugging and yeah. But anyway, and because that song is because that song is fairly simple, but yet really just has a, just really had a strong congregational fellowship, love one another as love one another as Christ has loved us, sort of ethos to it. It just really connected well with our congregation. They were pretty much singing it with us. They were pretty much singing with us, I would say by the second time through, as if they had been singing it for years. So, and I didn't really and because of the nature of the song, that it's kind of fastball down the middle sort of stuff in terms of in terms of African American songs. It's not a deep end of the pool song in terms of rhythmically, melodically or anything. It was just really easy for people to catch on to it. and to embrace it, and to, you know, and to really worship with it, like, you know, right off of the bat. So I didn't have to do a lot of prep for the song itself. I just said, we're going to sing this new song, and here's how it goes. We'll sing it, you know, our worship team will sing it one time, and then, you know, feel free to join us the second time around. And that's really all it took, because the song's so accessible. I may take a lot more steps and do a lot more teaching with a song that's a little bit more deep end of the pool, that has a lot more syncopation and whatnot.
Thank you. SaeJin, a song or resource to highlight?
Sure. Regarding your question about how do you hope people to engage songs and voices together, I hope that, and I think Keshia said this earlier too, but I hope that my songs will become your heart songs. And one of the heart songs of mine that is included in Voices Together is number 755, 내게 있는 향유옥합, which is translated as To My Precious Lord. And this is a song, an offering song or blessing song that many Korean churches, including the Mennonite Anabaptist ones I grew up in Korea, sing over and over again every Sunday for the act of offering. And so it's remembering through this women's devotion and generosity who blessed Jesus with anointing, helps us enter into a space of adoration of our Savior. So I hope that this song does that for you as well.
Keshia, I have a specific question about drums in the Cheyenne tradition. In the recording that Doug and Jude Crable did of Creation as a Song, they used drums, and they said that Lawrence Hart, who the text of that song is modeled after his writings, they said that Lawrence Hart encouraged them to use drums. And I also know that at your congregation you do not do drums. Can you talk about the significance and the conversation about drums in your tradition?
I cannot honestly say, well, I can say why we don't use drums in our church. And that is because when missionaries were sent to our reservation by the Mennonite church, all of that was stripped away. That was the old culture. That was the old, and you can't use drums. You can't, and this is also why for the longest time, only translated hymns were used instead of using songs with indigenous words and indigenous melodies, songs that were given to people. And because that's still seen as part of the pagan or not Christian culture, which is one of the reasons we don't use them in our church. Now we don't use them in our church primarily because as a woman in the Cheyenne culture, I cannot touch a drum. And that sounds very patriarchal, I guess is the word, or, you know, where it's demeaning to women, but it's because women in the Cheyenne culture are a connection between the spiritual realm and earth. And so we naturally carry a power that we cannot use in touching the drum. And it doesn't, and a lot of white people or have said, well, I don't want to participate in that if my daughters can't do the same things that the boys can do. And there's my white Mennonite mind that says, yeah, I understand that. There's my Cheyenne Mennonite mind that says, no, we're equals. Men are not above women. We have different roles. and different ways that our spirits communicate with each other and with the earth, and women naturally have that. So I don't use a drum, we don't use a drum, and we don't have people that are, I don't want to say qualified, but that have a drum that can be brought into our church space. So that's why in our church we don't use drums. In every other aspect, in funerals and other things, people bring in drums into our church and use them in that respectful way. But to not overstep and get into the realm of disrespecting within ceremony and how that works, we choose not to use the drum.
Thank you. Question for Rashard and Matthew, and maybe we'll start with Rashard. I'm wondering if you can highlight 1 or 2 or 3 resources that you use when you're researching the background of songs. We've talked about the importance of knowing the context of a song and kind of the stories behind songs. And so wondering if you are encountering a new song, especially from a culture that isn't your own, where would you start? And especially this may be helpful for song or worship leaders that don't know where to start. So specific websites or books or anything like that has been helpful for you could be great.
Well, a couple resources I've used. Halle Halle by Dr. Michael Hahn. There are a handful of songs in Voices Together that were actually previously in the Halle Halle collection that he compiled, and he gives a lot of background information. Also, there's a blog by by a colleague of ours, Paul Neely, called Global Worship Tumblr. It's a blog that Paul Neely does that has just it's a bit of a slog to find things in it. But he is very, very detailed and extremely knowledgeable and shares and just about every global worship song you can imagine, about just about every global worship song you can imagine that's made it into sort of mainstream, North American hymnals. He has resources at length about it. And then sometimes you even get lucky with hymnary.org. So I would say those are 3 resources that I most commonly use.
No, I was just gonna say, a really good start. If you're just starting out, hymnary.org is always a great place to just start. And Rashad also, said some really good resources there. I guess the only one I would add is I also use the Canterbury Dictionary of Hymnology. So that dictionary has over at least 5,000 entries in there, and they share quite a bit in that as well. So that could be a good resource.
Katie, are there resources and Voices Together that are helpful?
Why, yes, there are. On the accompaniment edition has many instrumental accompaniments and ideas for how to sing songs, how to accompany songs with instruments, how to lead songs and teach songs. And there are also, if in your Voices Together, if there's a little tiny 16th note in a circle, that means there's something in the accompaniment edition. And if there's a little R in a circle, this is at the bottom corner of the page. If there's a little R in a circle, that means you can find a reference note, a reference essay at voicestogetherhymnal.org/resources. There's a PDF there of a lot of, so this is freely available online, and you can find that lots of background information, cultural information about some songs, and and then there are many more resources on the Voices Together hymnal website. Some links to videos, and you can find other things on YouTube as well, as Rashard mentioned earlier, especially if you can, on the Voices Together website, there's a link to the Anabaptist Worship Network's spreadsheet of all the songs that has copyright information, but another use for that spreadsheet is that you can copy and paste the title of a song, including the non-Western language or alphabet. And so if your typewriter doesn't do Chinese characters, you can find the Chinese characters of the song. And if you copy and paste that into YouTube, you're much more likely to find a song sung by Chinese people if you use the Chinese characters. And so you can often find many versions of a song on YouTube, and if you use the original language, you're even more likely. Or you can just Google search to find pronunciation help and other background about the songs. Did you have others in mind, Annalie, with that leading question?
No, that was perfect.
All right. We have just a couple more minutes. I wonder if any of the panelists have questions for each other or any final thoughts that you had wanted to say earlier? Okay, I won't let it go on too long. My heart is full. You all have had so much wisdom to share, and so many both practical and impractical suggestions that will keep me thinking for a long time about how is this even possible to do. But you've inspired me to continue this work, this difficult work of engaging many languages, many cultures, many emotions, a lot of difficult work of learning and testing and trying. So thank you so much for your time and your insights here, and for all of the preparation you did for this. Once again, a reminder that this recording will be available on the Menno Media YouTube channel and the Voices Together website sometime next week. And also on the website, you can find, as I was saying, more resources. And if you're interested in buying any of the books, the accompaniment edition, the worship leader edition, and other aspects of the hymnal, you can find that information on the website. And for Canadians, you can purchase through Common Word, the Mennonite Church Canada denominational bookstore, and in the US you can go to Menno Media. And I think that's all of the technical information. So just one last thank you, and have a great evening.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.